This happened to me about 5 years ago, when I was living alone for the first time. I had just moved into a small one-bedroom apartment on the ground floor of a quiet street. Rent was cheap, and the neighborhood seemed safe enough. I didn't know many people in the area yet, so most nights were spent quietly at home, catching up on shows or scrolling through my phone. It was late in November, and nights had started to get cold. That evening, I was curled up on my couch, wrapped in a blanket, watching a movie with the lights dimmed. My living room had a large window facing the street, and although I usually kept the blinds closed, I had left them slightly open for some reason. Around 11 p.m., I got up to make some tea. The kitchen was small, directly across from the living room, with another window above the sink. As I was filling the kettle, I noticed something odd. From the corner of my eye, through that partially open blind in the living room, I saw movement. I froze, my hand still on the tap. Slowly, I turned my head toward the window. There was a man standing outside. At first, I thought maybe he was just walking past, but no, he wasn't moving. He was standing perfectly still, just a few feet from the glass, his head slightly tilted, staring in at me. My first reaction was confusion. Maybe he was lost or needed help. But then I realized something that sent a shiver straight through me. His face was partially hidden by the shadows, and he wasn't looking at my face. His eyes were locked on my hands, the way I was holding the kettle. It was like he was studying me. I quickly set the kettle down and grabbed my phone. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. I backed away toward my bedroom, trying to keep my eyes on him without making it obvious I was scared. I dialed 911 and whispered to the operator what was happening. She told me to lock all my doors and stay on the line. When I came back into the living room, he was gone. The operator told me an officer was already on the way, but my stomach dropped when I heard a faint tapping sound, coming from the bedroom window. My bedroom was on the other side of the apartment, facing the parking lot. I crept over and peeked between the blinds. There he was again. He had moved around the building, and now he was standing at my bedroom window, his hands in the pockets of a dark hoodie. This time, he was smiling. It wasn't a friendly smile, it was tight-lipped, forced, like he was holding back a laugh. The tapping continued, slow and deliberate. I could see his other hand. He was using one long, dirty fingernail to tap against the glass. The operator kept asking if I could still see him. I whispered, yes, and told her exactly where he was. Then, without warning, he stepped back into the darkness. That was the worst moment, because now I couldn't see him. I didn't know if he was still out there or trying to get in. About 2 minutes later, I heard the faint sound of my front door handle being tried. First a gentle jiggle, then harder and harder, until it rattled against the lock. I was holding my breath, gripping the phone so tightly my knuckles hurt. The operator kept telling me to stay calm, that police were seconds away. Then, the noise stopped. Through the front blinds, I saw headlights sweeping across the parking lot. The police had arrived. 2 officers got out and started looking around with flashlights. They searched the entire area but found no one. The only evidence they had was a single greasy handprint on my bedroom window. They told me it was probably someone passing through, maybe high, maybe just trying to scare me. But I couldn't shake the feeling that he had chosen my apartment for a reason, that he had been watching me for longer than I realized. That night, I didn't sleep at all. Every creak and distant sound made my skin crawl. I moved out 3 weeks later. And even now, 5 years later, I still can't stand the sound of slow tapping on glass. This happened in 2018 when I was staying at my aunt's old farmhouse for a few weeks. She had gone on a vacation with her husband and asked me to house sit, feed her cats, water the plants, bring in the mail. The farmhouse was over 100 years old, sitting alone on a quiet country road with no neighbors in sight. At night, it was dark. No streetlights, no passing cars, just the sound of crickets and wind in the trees. The first 2 nights were uneventful. I kept the doors locked and stayed upstairs, watching Netflix until I fell asleep. On the 3rd night, something strange happened. Around 1 a.m., I was lying in bed scrolling on my phone when I heard a loud, hollow thud from somewhere below me. the sound came from the kitchen area, which was directly above the basement. Now, the basement in that house was creepy even in the daytime. It had a narrow wooden staircase and stone walls, and it always smelled damp, like old earth. I had no reason to go down there. My aunt kept all the food upstairs, so I avoided it completely. I froze, listening. At first, I thought maybe it was one of the cats knocking something over, but then I remembered both of them were curled up on the bed with me. Another sound followed, this time, a slow, dragging noise. My heart started pounding. I got up, tiptoed down the hall, and peeked down the stairs toward the kitchen. Everything looked normal from where I stood, but it was too dark to see the basement door from that angle. I decided to call my boyfriend. He picked up and told me it was probably just the house settling, but I could hear in his voice that he wasn't convinced. He offered to drive over, but he lived almost an hour away. While we were talking, I heard something that made me drop my phone, 3 slow, deliberate knocks from the basement door. Not the front door. Not the back door. The basement door. I stood completely still, my breathing sharp and fast. The knocks came again, same slow rhythm, each one echoing through the kitchen. I forced myself to grab my phone again and dial 911. I whispered to the dispatcher what was happening, and she told me to lock myself in a room and stay on the line until police arrived. I quietly backed up the stairs and locked myself in the guest bedroom. The cats were restless now, pacing and flicking their tails. Then came another noise, not knocking this time, but the unmistakable sound of the basement door creaking open. The dispatcher was speaking, but I could barely hear her over the rush of blood in my ears. I was convinced someone was in the house. I stayed in that locked room for what felt like forever until I finally heard heavy footsteps downstairs, but this time, it was the police. They found the basement door wide open. They went down with flashlights but found no one. What they did find was unsettling. An old wooden chair in the middle of the basement floor, directly under one of the tiny windows. The window latch was broken, and there were fresh muddy footprints on the floor leading toward the stairs. The officers believed someone had been coming into the basement from outside, maybe using it as shelter, and that night they decided to make themselves known. I didn't stay another night in that house. I left the next morning and told my aunt what happened. She got the window fixed, but to this day she swears she still hears noises from the basement late at night. This happened last winter when I was renting a small cabin in the mountains for a week. I wanted a quiet escape from the city, just me, some books, and the snow. The cabin was about 30 minutes from the nearest town, tucked away at the end of a long gravel driveway. The owner lived a few miles down the road and had assured me the place was completely safe. The first few days were peaceful. I'd wake up to snow-covered trees, make coffee, and spend the day reading by the fireplace. At night, it was so quiet that I could hear the ticking of the wall clock from across the room. On the 4th night, just after midnight, I was sitting in the living room with a blanket over my legs when I heard it, the faint crunch of footsteps on snow. At first, I thought maybe it was a deer or some other animal. But the sound was slow, deliberate, and coming directly toward the cabin. The porch steps creaked. I sat perfectly still, every nerve in my body tense. Whoever it was had reached the porch, and I could hear them moving from one side to the other, like they were looking in through the windows. The cabin had no curtains in the living room, just big glass windows facing the forest. I knew if I moved, whoever was outside could see me. I reached for my phone as quietly as I could and dialed the cabin owner. He didn't answer. I called again, still nothing. The footsteps stopped. For a few seconds, there was total silence, and then, the faint sound of breathing. Right outside the glass. I finally grabbed the fireplace poker and, heart pounding, crept toward the hallway that led to the bedroom. I shut the door and locked it, then called 911. While I was on the phone with the dispatcher, the person outside started tapping on the bedroom window. Slow, deliberate taps. I whispered to the dispatcher exactly what was happening. She told me to stay on the line, deputies were already on their way. The tapping stopped. Then I heard the porch steps again, but this time moving away. I stayed in that locked room until I saw flashing lights through the cracks in the blinds. The deputies searched the property but didn't find anyone. However, in the fresh snow, they found a single set of footprints leading from the woods to the porch, and stopping right under the living room window. There were no tracks showing where the person had gone afterward. They told me the snow must have covered them, but that night I couldn't stop thinking about one thing: how quiet the forest had been before the footsteps started, and how easy it would be for someone to just stand out there in the dark, waiting. I cut my trip short and left the next morning. And even now, whenever it snows, I find myself listening for footsteps that shouldn't be there.